For 15 years, one aircraft haunted the dreams of every military strategist in the Western world. It flew higher than anything NATO had. It flew faster than anything NATO had. And no one, not a single intelligence agency across the entire Western alliance, knew exactly what it was capable of. They called it the Foxbat. And the moment Western satellites first captured its silhouette on a Soviet airfield, the entire balance of Cold War air power shifted in ways no one was prepared for. This is the story of the MiG-25, the aircraft that terrified an entire military alliance into spending billions of dollars on weapons they didn't need, redrawing their entire aerial combat doctrine around a threat they didn't fully understand. And it is the story of how one quiet morning in September of 1976, a single Soviet pilot made a decision that would unravel one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War, expose the truth behind the legend, and change aviation history forever. It all began in the early 1960s, during the most dangerous years of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was locked in a technological arms race with the United States, and nowhere was that race more intense than in the skies. American reconnaissance aircraft, particularly the SR-71 Blackbird and its predecessor the A-12, were flying over Soviet territory at speeds and altitudes that made them virtually untouchable. Soviet air defenses were being humiliated. Missiles couldn't reach them, interceptors couldn't catch them, and every failed attempt to bring one down was a reminder that in the realm of high-altitude, high-speed flight, the Americans held every advantage. The Soviet leadership demanded a solution, not a gradual improvement, not an incremental step forward, but a machine that would close the gap entirely. The task fell to the Mikoyan-Gurevich Design Bureau, one of the most legendary aircraft manufacturers in Soviet history, and the engineers there, according to documented accounts, were given a mandate that bordered on the impossible: build an interceptor that could fly at 3 times the speed of sound, reach altitudes above 80,000 feet, and do it fast enough to catch the fastest aircraft the Americans had ever built. What they created would become the most feared mystery in Western aviation intelligence for the next decade and a half. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one. And trust me, what comes next in this story is something you won't want to miss. Western intelligence agencies first became aware of the MiG-25 in the mid-1960s, when satellite imagery captured what appeared to be a massive, twin-engine aircraft at a Soviet test facility. The images were grainy, incomplete, and deeply alarming. Analysis revealed an aircraft of enormous proportions, far larger than any fighter or interceptor the Soviets had previously built. The wingspan suggested high-altitude capability. The engine intakes suggested tremendous power, and the overall configuration suggested a machine designed for one thing, and one thing only: raw, uncompromising speed. Initial NATO assessments, according to declassified intelligence reports, painted a terrifying picture. Analysts estimated the aircraft could exceed Mach 3. They believed it carried advanced avionics, possibly including look-down, shoot-down radar capability that would allow it to engage targets at any altitude. Some assessments suggested it might even be maneuverable enough to serve as an air superiority fighter, capable of outperforming anything in the Western arsenal in a dogfight. The designation they gave it, Foxbat, became synonymous with Soviet aerial dominance. The fear was not abstract, it was specific, measurable, and it drove policy. According to multiple defense historians, the existence of the MiG-25, or rather what NATO believed the MiG-25 to be, directly influenced the development of the F-15 Eagle. The United States Air Force, faced with intelligence suggesting the Soviets had built a Mach 3 air superiority fighter with advanced radar and high maneuverability, concluded that nothing in their current inventory could match it. The F-4 Phantom, the backbone of American fighter aviation at the time, was fast and versatile, but not designed to compete with something of the Foxbat's reported capabilities. A new aircraft was needed, one that could outfight, outclimb, and outmaneuver this terrifying Soviet machine. The result was one of the most expensive and ambitious fighter programs in American history. The F-15 was designed from the ground up with a single overriding philosophy: not a pound for air-to-ground. It was a pure air superiority fighter, built to dominate in aerial combat against the most advanced threat the Soviets could produce. Every design choice, from its massive twin engines to its advanced radar to its exceptional maneuverability, was shaped by intelligence assessments of the MiG-25. Billions of dollars flowed into the program. Careers were built around it. An entire generation of Western air combat doctrine was reshaped by the shadow of the Foxbat. And across the Atlantic, the fear was no less intense. European NATO members, whose air forces would be the first line of defense in any conventional war with the Warsaw Pact, viewed the MiG-25 as a potential game-changer. Analysis suggested that in a conflict scenario, waves of Foxbats could sweep across the inner German border at altitudes and speeds that would render existing air defense systems ineffective. Interceptors would struggle to reach them. Surface-to-air missiles of the era had limited engagement envelopes at extreme altitudes. The MiG-25 represented, in the minds of NATO planners, a weapon against which they had no reliable counter. For years, the mystery deepened. The Soviets, fully aware of the psychological advantage the Foxbat provided, did everything in their power to maintain the mystique. Security around the aircraft was extraordinary. Flight testing was conducted at remote facilities deep within Soviet territory. Information was compartmentalized even within the Soviet military itself. Pilots who flew the aircraft were among the most carefully vetted and monitored personnel in the entire armed forces. The MiG-25 was not just an airplane. It was a state secret of the highest order. And then, on the 6th of September, 1976, everything changed. The morning was unremarkable at the Soviet airbase in Chuguyevka, in the Russian Far East. Weather reports indicated standard conditions. Flight operations were routine. Among the aircraft scheduled for a training sortie that day was a MiG-25P, the interceptor variant, armed and fueled for what was logged as a standard patrol exercise. The pilot assigned to that aircraft had been a decorated officer with years of service. According to subsequent reports, nothing in the pilot's recent behavior had raised any flags. Colleagues described a competent, professional aviator who showed no outward signs of dissatisfaction or disloyalty. But something had been building beneath the surface. According to accounts that emerged after the event, the pilot had grown increasingly disillusioned with the Soviet system. The details of that disillusionment, the specific grievances and frustrations, would become clearer in the months and years that followed. What is certain is that on that September morning, when the MiG-25 lifted off the runway and climbed into the overcast sky, the pilot had no intention of completing the assigned training mission. Instead of following the prescribed flight path, the aircraft turned southeast. It descended to extremely low altitude, hugging the terrain to avoid Soviet radar coverage. The pilot knew the air defense network intimately, knew where the gaps were, knew how to exploit the limitations of ground-based tracking systems. The MiG-25 screamed across the Sea of Japan at near wave-top height, its massive engines burning fuel at a rate that made every kilometer a calculation of survival. Japanese air defense radar operators detected the contact. Reports indicate there was initial confusion about the nature of the target. A fast-moving, low-altitude contact approaching Japanese airspace from the direction of the Soviet Union could mean many things, and none of them were good. Interceptors were scrambled, alerts were issued, but the MiG-25 was moving with purpose, and its pilot had already chosen a destination. The aircraft crossed into Japanese airspace and headed for Hakodate, a civilian airport on the northern island of Hokkaido. The approach was not smooth. According to documented accounts, the aircraft was running critically low on fuel. The pilot had pushed the engines hard during the low-altitude dash across the sea, and the MiG-25 consumed fuel at an extraordinary rate at low altitude, far from the high-altitude cruise conditions it was designed for. The margin for error was essentially zero. The landing at Hakodate was dramatic. The MiG-25, designed for long, well-prepared military runways, came in fast and heavy on a civilian airfield not built for such an aircraft. The aircraft overran the runway, tearing through the overrun area before coming to a stop. According to reports from airport personnel, the scene was chaotic. A massive Soviet military aircraft sat steaming on a Japanese civilian airport, its pilot climbing out of the cockpit and immediately requesting political asylum. The diplomatic firestorm was instantaneous. The Soviet Union demanded the immediate return of both the pilot and the aircraft. The demand was absolute, non-negotiable, and backed by the full weight of Soviet diplomatic pressure. The Japanese government found itself in an extraordinarily delicate position. On one hand, returning the pilot would be a violation of international norms regarding political asylum. On the other hand, keeping the aircraft, even temporarily, risked a severe deterioration in relations with one of the most powerful military states on Earth. What happened next would become one of the most significant intelligence events of the entire Cold War. The Japanese government, under enormous pressure from both sides, ultimately allowed American intelligence teams access to the aircraft. According to declassified reports, the examination was thorough, methodical, and stunning in what it revealed. For over a decade, the MiG-25 had been the boogeyman of Western air power, the aircraft that justified billions in defense spending and reshaped entire military strategies. Now, for the first time, Western engineers and intelligence analysts could see what was actually under the skin. The first surprise was the construction material. Western analysts had assumed the MiG-25 was built primarily from titanium, the same exotic, expensive, heat-resistant material used in the SR-71 Blackbird. Titanium construction would have explained the aircraft's reported speed capabilities and suggested an extremely advanced manufacturing base. What the examination revealed was dramatically different. According to the technical analysis, approximately 80% of the aircraft's airframe was constructed from nickel-steel alloy, not titanium, steel. The remaining structure was a mix of aluminum and some titanium in critical high-temperature areas, but the vast majority of the aircraft was built from a material that was heavy, relatively inexpensive, and decidedly unglamorous. The implications were immediate and profound. The MiG-25 was not the refined, cutting-edge technological marvel that NATO had feared. It was, in many respects, a brute-force solution to the problem of high-speed, high-altitude flight. The steel construction made the aircraft enormously heavy, which in turn explained many of its performance characteristics, and more importantly, its limitations. Analysis revealed that the aircraft's wing loading was extremely high, meaning that in any kind of turning engagement, the MiG-25 would be at a severe disadvantage. It could fly fast in a straight line. It could climb to extraordinary altitudes, but it could not maneuver. The avionics told a similar story. NATO analysts had speculated about advanced look-down, shoot-down radar capability, about sophisticated electronic warfare suites, about avionics that represented the cutting edge of Soviet technology. What they found was a radar system that was powerful, but based on vacuum tube technology, not the solid-state electronics that Western avionics had already transitioned to. The radar was effective for its intended purpose, guiding the aircraft toward high-altitude targets for head-on missile attacks, but it was limited in other respects. Documented analysis noted that the system produced significant electromagnetic emissions that would make the aircraft detectable at considerable range, and its ability to track targets against ground clutter was far more limited than NATO had feared. The engines, massive Tumansky R-15 turbojets, were impressive in their raw power output, but remarkably crude in their design philosophy. They were essentially designed for one performance regime: high-altitude, high-speed flight. At lower altitudes, fuel consumption was extraordinary, engine life was dramatically shortened, and the aircraft's performance advantages largely evaporated. Reports indicated that pushing the aircraft beyond Mach 2.8 risked catastrophic engine damage, and sustained flight at maximum speed could reduce engine life to a fraction of its already limited service interval. The weapon's loadout further confirmed the interceptor role. The MiG-25 carried 4 air-to-air missiles, typically a mix of radar-guided and infrared-guided variants. These were large, long-range weapons designed for head-on engagements against non-maneuvering targets at high altitude. They were effective in that role, but they were not designed for close range, turning engagements where an enemy fighter would be pulling high-G maneuvers to evade. The aircraft carried no internal cannon, a notable absence for any machine meant to engage in close aerial combat. Everything about the weapons fit, from the missile types to the fire control integration, pointed to a single conclusion. Perhaps most significantly, the examination revealed that the MiG-25 was never designed to be an air superiority fighter. It was an interceptor, pure and simple. Its mission was to climb to extreme altitude as quickly as possible, accelerate to maximum speed on an intercept course, fire its missiles at a high-flying target, and return to base. It was built to counter a very specific threat: American high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft and, potentially, supersonic bombers like the XB-70 Valkyrie that had been under development. It was never meant to dogfight. It was never meant to turn. It was never meant to compete in the kind of aerial combat that NATO had spent billions preparing to fight. The realization hit Western defense establishments like a shockwave. For 15 years, the most powerful military alliance in history had been building its air combat strategy around a threat that was fundamentally different from what they believed it to be. The F-15 Eagle, one of the most capable and expensive fighter aircraft ever built, had been designed primarily to counter an aircraft that could barely turn. Billions of dollars in defense spending, thousands of engineering hours, entire procurement programs and strategic doctrines had been shaped by a phantom, a misunderstanding amplified by secrecy, fed by worst-case analysis, and never corrected because no one had the actual data to challenge the assumptions. According to defense analysts who studied the aftermath, the MiG-25 defection revealed something far more important than the specifications of a single aircraft. It exposed a fundamental flaw in the way intelligence agencies assessed threats during the Cold War. In the absence of concrete information, analysts defaulted to worst-case assumptions. Every ambiguity was resolved in favor of the threat. Every gap in knowledge was filled with the most dangerous possibility. The result was a threat assessment that bore little resemblance to reality, but drove real policy, real spending, and real strategic decisions. The Soviet Union was furious. The diplomatic fallout was severe and prolonged. The aircraft was eventually returned to the Soviets, but only after it had been completely disassembled, examined down to individual components, and thoroughly documented. According to reports, the Soviets claimed the aircraft was returned in pieces, literally packed in crates, some of which were allegedly missing. The damage to Soviet military secrecy was incalculable. Not only had the West gained detailed technical knowledge of one of their most closely guarded weapon systems, but the mystique that had made the MiG-25 such a powerful psychological weapon had been shattered. In the years that followed, the Soviet Union responded by developing the MiG-31, a genuine advancement over the Foxbat that incorporated many of the capabilities NATO had originally attributed to its predecessor. The MiG-31 featured true look-down, shoot-down radar, more sophisticated avionics, improved engines, and better overall capability as an interceptor. In a sense, NATO's exaggerated fear of the MiG-25 may have been a self-fulfilling prophecy, pushing the Soviets to actually build the aircraft that the West had always imagined the Foxbat to be. The pilot who landed at Hokkaido was granted asylum in the United States, where a new identity and a new life awaited. According to published accounts, the transition was difficult. Moving from the closed world of the Soviet military to American civilian life presented challenges that went far beyond language and culture. The pilot had given up everything: family, career, homeland, country, for a chance at freedom. Whether that trade was worth it is a question only one person could answer, and the answer likely changed with the years. But the legacy of that September morning extends far beyond one individual's choice. The MiG-25 defection became a case study in intelligence analysis, taught at military academies and intelligence schools around the world. It demonstrated how secrecy itself can become a weapon, how the absence of information can be more powerful than any missile or radar system, and how the assumptions we make about our adversaries can shape our own behavior in ways that are as costly as any battlefield defeat. The Foxbat still holds records. Its time to altitude marks, set during the 1970s, stood for decades, As a pure expression of speed and altitude performance, it remains one of the most remarkable aircraft ever built. Its designers achieved exactly what they set out to achieve: an interceptor that could reach any target, at any altitude, faster than anything else in the sky. That they did so with steel and vacuum tubes, with brute force rather than technological elegance, makes the achievement arguably more impressive, not less. But the real story of the MiG-25 is not about speed or altitude or engineering. It is about perception. It is about how fear fills the gaps in our knowledge. It is about how a machine built for one purpose can be transformed, through secrecy and assumption, into something entirely different in the minds of those who fear it. For 15 years, NATO planned for a war against an aircraft that did not exist in the form they imagined. And when the truth finally landed on a Japanese runway on a quiet September morning, it didn't just reveal the secrets of a Soviet interceptor. It revealed how much of what we fear is built not from steel and jet fuel, but from the stories we tell ourselves in the dark. The Foxbat terrified the world, and the truth about why is perhaps the most important lesson it left behind.